Hello everyone and welcome back to She Makes It Work. I'm Gabby and today I'm going to talk to you about a slightly difficult subject. We're going to talk about not having children. This is not something I talk about a lot, but one of the things Abby and I wanted to do with this channel is represent the perspective of a woman who doesn't have children as well as a woman who is a single mom and what those two experiences are like. So Abby and I decided that we're actually going to open up and talk about this, and that involves both of us getting vulnerable. So we're going to do these separately. So here we go. From a young age, I knew I did not want to have children. I also knew that this was not the most common path, but I never worried about that, at least not until I got into the working world. The reason I never worried about it is because from a very young age, I didn't have that mommy feeling. I never had that feeling some little girls have, and I've seen this in some of my nieces, but I never had that feeling of I want to grow up and have kids. I want to grow up and be a mom. That just wasn't what was in my heart. And it was very apparent at a young age that I was a little bit different than other girls. I didn't care to play with dolls. I certainly didn't care to play with baby dolls. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I just didn't understand it. I didn't get what you would do with them, basically. And it's not that I lacked imagination. I loved reading. I loved living in fictional worlds. I often say that reading saved me from a difficult childhood. I just didn't get playing with dolls. I had a Barbie and I didn't know what to do with her. But she was very pretty. I did also get a Barbie washing machine, and I liked that because it was mechanical. So even at a young age, I always liked mechanical things. I loved mechanical toys. I remember my sister, when I was very young, saying I was very hard to shop for because I loved things like the electronics, Simon Says, when those first came out, but I didn't like non-electric toys. Basically, I wanted books and I wanted electric gadgets when I was a kid. And animals. I loved animals. But that was a little difficult considering that I was born in the mid-70s, and in the 80s there were just, that was the beginning of electronic toys for children. So I do have to admit I was a little bit hard to shop for as a kid. And then in high school and college, it just wasn't a big deal that I didn't want to have kids. I went to college in California, and growing up, the expectation wasn't that you would get married right away and have kids. So I didn't feel any pressure on the topic. I didn't feel like I had to defend it or explain it or anything else. And I did have friends who, developed long-term relationships in college. And even then, I'd say most of my peer group from college didn't get married until their late 20s and maybe started having kids late 20s or early 30s. So definitely a different timeline than a lot of the rest of the country, which I then learned after I moved to Texas. I didn't realize I'd been in such a bubble growing up in Northern California, where again, marrying later was the norm, having kids later was the norm, and I frankly knew a lot of people growing up who didn't have kids. My dad's friends, he had a number of friends who didn't have children. It wasn't wildly popular to not have children, but it wasn't unknown, I guess is the right way to say it. So I didn't really, like I said, think much of my choice. Now, I first realized that it was a little bit of an odd choice to other people when I did try to, in my mid-20s, go to the doctor and have my tubes tied. I didn't want to risk an accidental pregnancy, and like I said, I knew I never wanted to be a mom, and no doctors at that time would do anything that could negatively impact my fertility. So that was a no from my doctors, and that was something that plagued me for a long time because I also had a lot of, frankly, just health issues with the lady business, and if I'd been able to take care of that, that probably would have saved me a lot of pain and expense over the years. So I do regret that that's how our system works, but a lot of women have run into that, where the doctors and the medical system are prioritizing their fertility over the well-being of women. The other thing I noticed when I first moved to Texas, I was in my early 20s, I'd graduated from college, and I was working in the technical field. And I got my first job here, and all the people I worked with were men, which, that's okay. That's fine. But I noticed that all of them were married and had gotten married at young ages. So I was always the youngest and most female person in my work peer groups for a very, very long time. I'd say for about 20 years. And it wasn't until recently that I started realizing I'm one of the older people in the room. And it was a little bit of a refreshing change because I'd been so young for so long, but definitely still female. So I did notice that my coworkers, like I said, had gotten married at young ages, and that anybody who was my age, there was only one guy I worked with that was my age and was also single. Everybody else was married and had young kids. And I was like, okay, and just didn't think much of it because I was early in my career. And frankly, I was focused on having just moved to Texas and building a friend group and building that career. And then I noticed that all my friends my age were really focused on getting married if they weren't already. And so that really impacted my ability to make friends, because a lot of married people want to hang out with other married people. And a lot of people with children, they want to hang out with people who have children. There's nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. And frankly, it's a convenience thing for a lot of them because their kids can play together. They watch each other's kids. It's just a different community, basically. So I did struggle to find community at first when I moved here because, again, young female working in technology, unmarried, no kids, and I didn't have a partner at that time either. But it really, I'd say, started to get bad in my late 20s. And at that point, I'd always gotten some sideways looks from family friends about the fact that I just wasn't interested in quickly finding a life partner or marrying. And I just wasn't interested in that. I was interested in my career. And I started getting some comments from close family members about, isn't it time to settle down? And it wasn't. I didn't want to settle down, and I didn't understand why I was getting this pressure. And at one point, a very, very close family member, and this is hard to say because it really hurt and still hurts to this day, told me I was selfish for not wanting to have children. And that really hit me because I really care about this person, and getting called selfish is a hard thing to hear. And it really caused me to dig a little bit deeper into my reasons for not having kids, because that was also the point where everyone around me kept telling me, you're going to change your mind. And that doctor I mentioned, that was obviously one of the reasons that they don't want to impact your fertility, is because they're convinced you're going to change your mind later. And that's a little bit of a paternalistic outlook, to be honest, to think that an adult young woman who can vote and buy a car and do all these other things can't make up her own mind about her fertility and her life choices. Nobody tells me you might not want that car later. I have heard you might not want that tattoo later, but not often. But when it comes to kids, for some reason, people feel like they have a right to weigh in on your life decision in a way that they don't about how you spend your money or how you do anything else. So after hearing this kind of hurtful thing from a close family member, I dug deeper on my reasons, and I knew I'd never wanted children, but I realized that this was, society was viewing this as such a huge and controversial decision that I needed to better understand my own decision and make sure I wasn't missing something. Because of, everyone's like, you're going to miss out on all these experiences. And I'm like, well, I don't want to miss out on all these experiences. So I did spend some time doing some soul searching. And it was probably around the time, in my late teens, mid, and now really crystallizing in my mid to late 20s, that I realized that I did not think I would be a good mother. And that is why the selfishness statement hurts so much, because I think that in my mind, it was more selfish to have kids to make yourself happy without thinking about whether or not you would be a good parent to those children. And so I felt like, well, kids are fun. I really enjoyed my sister's kids. I helped quite a bit with them, and I loved their baby and toddler years especially. I never thought I should do this for myself, because especially after my sister had kids, quickly realized I am not cut out for this. I am not built for this. Doing that day in and day out, you have to be a saint to do that. And I'm not that kind of a saint. And so I felt like it was less selfish to not have kids and not put my own generational trauma on them, because having come from a difficult childhood, there's no way I had the skills to be a good parent. And if it's something that I did genuinely desire, it would be worth building those skills. But I also knew I didn't desire it enough to build those skills to be a good parent. And I think parenting is one of the most important jobs in the world. And so I think you have to be really good at it. Like, you have to put in the work. You have to educate yourself on how to be a good parent. And then you do that work every day with your child. Like, you have the responsibility of growing and building an entire human being who has to grow up to be a productive and healthy adult. Like, holy crap, that is a huge responsibility. And it's not one I would take lightly. So I knew that a lot of my learned behaviors and learned emotions from growing up in that difficult childhood, those were things that I would need to be processing and working through my whole adult life. And I have. I've been doing that work in my 20s and my 30s. And now that I'm well into my 40s, I'll still find something that I have to unlearn or learn a new way around. And I wouldn't have been a good parent. And so I think that having children comes down to both things. Just like anything else in life, it's that skill will. You have to have the desire to do something, and you have to have the skills to do it well. And when it comes to growing humans, I think that that's where it's even more important that you have the skills to do it. And some of it you do learn along the way. I've heard a lot of parents say that. But in my case, I was starting from such a deficit. I was starting from behind on those skills that starting where I was would not have been good for the child or for me. So I had to do a lot of that deep work and deep introspection about having children, and that impacted my ability to find a partner in Texas. And especially if I wanted that partner to be a man. A lot of men where I live want children. And I know popular culture is full of this like concept that men don't want children. And I think if an individual man doesn't want children and has his reasons, that's his choice, obviously. But what I have found is that a lot of men genuinely want families. And that did impact my ability to find somebody to be with. I had to find somebody who also didn't want children. Now, I would have been fine being a stepmom. So when I was dating, I opened the door to dating a divorced man who already had children, both out of practicality. Well, I'd say mostly out of practicality. But I love kids. I love other people's kids. And the job of a stepmom is very different than the job of a mom. So that did expand my dating pool slightly. Now, how did this impact work? That is where I started getting the most pressure, oddly enough. You know, for the most part, you would say in a professional environment, people stay out of your personal life. But that's not true. And it's especially not true when I moved into consulting. But let me start a little further back. So before I moved into consulting, I had moved into technology leadership at my first big company that I worked for and was there for a very long time. And my pay was lagging behind a lot of my peers. And I had a lot of, I'd say, institutionalized guilt over wanting to get paid what I was worth because all of my male coworkers were supporting their families. So a wife who often didn't work and multiple children off of their salaries. And everybody knew that wasn't my situation. And so I'd say that that was when I first noticed an actual work impact of not having kids, is that subconsciously people think you don't need the money. And I was young enough and not professionally mature enough to stand up for my salary needs and to insist on it. And like I said, I personally had a lot of institutionalized feeling of I don't need that money as much because I'm not raising a family. And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of women, is to stand up for what they're worth no matter what. And I think that's hard for working moms, and I think that's hard for working women who aren't moms. So that's not a uniquely Gabby issue. But I will say that not having kids puts an extra layer of complexity on it where you feel like they need it more, and your coworkers kind of think that too, to be honest, and your bosses and your leadership do. And I enjoyed the work I was doing, but I was working for what I would call a shrinking company. It had been sold a few times. We'd gone through layoffs for years and years and years. They were not looking to pay people if they didn't have to. So I had to fight for everything I had at that company. I had to fight for my promotions, and I never successfully fought for a meaningful raise at that company. And to make more money, I had to change companies, which is very true. That's, again, not a uniquely Gabby problem, but I really wanted to stay where I was. I wanted to grow within a company, but unfortunately that's not rewarded anymore. So I just want to caveat the conversation about money by saying you will always, always, always get your biggest increases by changing companies. That's just reality. And especially if you've grown up in that company from a fairly young age and have always been the one woman in leadership or the one childless woman especially, you're not getting paid what everybody else is making. And the only way to change that is to change jobs. So once I started to realize that pay thing and my own challenges standing up for what I deserved, I also noticed that I was, I'd hear it mostly from work. You'll change your mind, you'll change your mind. So at that time, I wasn't officially in full-time consulting, but we did have clients that we worked with. And I'd been working with and entertaining clients since I was in my early 20s. And I would hear this mostly from clients. Most of my coworkers were like, well, that's just Gabby, But, it's constantly working with vendors and clients and definitely getting a lot of pressure from them and definitely a lot of, frankly, patronizing statements of, oh, you're young, you don't know what you want, you'll change your mind. I have to tell you, I heard that constantly until I was 41 years old. You're young, you'll change your mind. And it was worse when I did move into full-time consulting because I was working with more and more clients and spending more and more time with them, and they don't feel as fettered as your own company's coworkers about not getting in your personal business. And I'd say also in consulting, a lot of what we're selling is our own personalities, and people want to get to know you personally, your coworkers and your clients. That's part of the gig, basically. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of inappropriate conversations about me not having kids. And by the time I was in my late 30s, I definitely had developed a little bit more of the Gabby F it attitude that I have today. And so sometimes I would just tell people it just wasn't in the cards and look kind of sad because you want to make me feel bad about not having kids. I want to make you feel bad for asking such a personal question or getting into somebody's business like that. But, it just, especially in the environment in which I was working, it was just such an odd choice. I do understand that it was just an odd choice and people genuinely are curious, and that curiosity isn't always coming out of malice, but just because it's not malignly intended doesn't mean it doesn't have a negative impact. And that was my boundary. I did not want to talk about it anymore. I'd been being asked about it for 20 something years at that point, and I'm kind of over talking about it. It wasn't until I started visibly looking a little bit older that the conversation just ceased. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of my peer group, their kids are now in college and they're less of a focus in their life. And so they don't focus as much on what other people are doing with their kids. I thought that was an interesting trend that I've noticed happening. I also think that there's a social consciousness that's been going around that people have started to learn over the years not to get into other people's business, especially since so many people do struggle with fertility. Now, I was lucky enough that I did find a partner who did not want to have children, and he was as adamant about it as I was. And so he did have a vasectomy right after we got married. And then a few years later, we were briefly living in Oregon, and I was continuing to have issues and ended up having a procedure to correct some issues I was having, and that would also make it so I could never have children. It is tough sometimes because I love my nieces and nephews, but it's always been very clear that they're not my children. And so people are always like, who's going to take care of you in your old age? That's a fun discourse. And I love it that a lot of younger people are saying, bold of you to assume that your children will, because we're not seeing a lot of that. Part of the reason I wanted to talk about this, though, and I think this is really important, is that so many women in my life have come to me privately and shared with me that they didn't realize they could choose not to have children. And it always surprised me when they did, because sometimes it was the most independent, boss lady women who had children who were sharing with me that if they had realized it was a choice, they wouldn't have done it. And they love their kids, and they're very good moms. But knowing the emotional, physical, financial cost of having and raising children, and knowing that the burden of being a mom falls on the women, they wouldn't have done it had they have known. And that was another reason I didn't want to be a parent, was because I didn't want to be a mom. And there are very, very few relationships where the burden of parenthood is equal. The woman bears the child, and because of nursing and a lot of other factors, the child does have a stronger bond with the woman, but that does continue through the parenting life cycle. Most couple dynamics I've seen, the mom has a different role than the dad with the child and in the relationship. And that was a role I didn't want. I didn't want to be mom and do 60 to 75% of the practical and emotional work. So when these women are sharing with me that if they'd known then that this was an option, they wouldn't have done it, I feel terrible for them, because I've seen the load they carry. And especially since all of them are also professional women where they have very exciting and challenging careers that they put their hearts into as well. I wanted to make this video for the young women who haven't had kids. So if that's you, I just want you to know I see you and I empathize with you. And if you are a younger woman and you haven't had kids yet, I just want you to know it is a choice. And none of what I had to deal with people shaming me publicly and privately for not having kids, none of that was as bad as leading a life that you don't genuinely want to be leading. And so I would say when it comes to any of your major life choices, before you decide one way or another, go through that same process of self-examination. Why do I want this? Why do I not want this? Is it the right reasons? Am I ready? What do I need to do to get ready if it's something I truly believe in? If you're at that point where you've realized this isn't what drives me, I don't feel like this is my purpose, I just want you to know that's okay. It's okay. Because one of the things we don't talk about enough is that we're not all motivated and fulfilled by the same things. And so I think it's crazy that in the 90s and in the early 2000s, I was getting shamed for prioritizing my career when I was the only person supporting myself. Of course I should be prioritizing my career, both practically and emotionally. That is what I cared about. And so I think that that's my other message here, is that as humans, we all have to identify why we're here and what life we want to build for ourselves and what life we want to lead, because it's our life and we get one, as far as I know. No expert on this one, but as far as I know, we just get the one life. What do you want that to look like? People always talk about getting to the end and not having regrets, and you'll regret not having kids. And I'm like, I would have regretted having kids. I would have regretted doing a poor job at being a mother or not focusing on what really fulfilled me. So I'd say definitely ask yourself, what is it that fulfills me and what do I think my purpose is? And if that is to start and grow and run a family, do that. But it might not be. And I remember hearing something 20 odd years ago that really helped me feel validated in my life choices. And it was that we don't all have the same purpose or focus. Some people are career focused, some people are spiritually focused, some people are family focused, and some people are socially focused. And it's really important to know who you are so that you can then make the life choices for yourself. Because I know plenty of people who are amazingly spiritual people, and that's where they find their fulfillment, and that's what they focus on. And they may also choose to have children. I know people who love their growing and raising a family, and that is their focus and their passion, and that is their life's work. And I think that's amazing to know that and then live it. But what is very sad is when you meet people and you know they're not leading the life that they want to lead. And I think part of the reason that this was instilled in me so young was because that was part of what happened with my parents, was watching them not leading lives that fulfilled them and not doing what they were meant to be doing, and how much that squandered and wasted potential turned into toxicity and negative coping mechanisms. And I think that that's so true for all of us. If we're not leading the life we were meant to lead, we're hurting ourselves throughout our whole lives, and that damage carries forward. So it was so nice to hear that we don't all have the same purpose, because I think a lot of people, when they're pressuring us to have kids or to make different life choices, are feeling like, well, this is what fulfills me, therefore it's what's going to fulfill you. They're not realizing we're not all driven by the same things, and we don't need to be, and that's okay. And work may look different for some people. Like, it doesn't mean a corporate job or a career. Your work could be art. Your work could be building something. Your work could be making a change in the world. But to me, when I say work, it's about creating something and building something. And for me, that something isn't a family. It is something where I'm leveraging my professional skills to help a client, or to help women develop the same professional skills or their own. That's my purpose in life. And it would have been very damaging for me to not embrace that purpose and to go down the wrong path in my life. And that's what I want to encourage all of our viewers to do, is identify what your purpose is and who you are and what's fulfilling to you and what does that life look like. And even if you need to make unconventional or unpopular choices, it's your life. You get to do that, and you need to do that. And nobody else can do that for you, and nobody else can change that. And they shouldn't try. And it's okay to challenge people. Have you thought about this or that? But really, I think the best challenge is challenging people to find themselves and to find a life of purpose and to find the courage to live that life for themselves. And so if you look back on what I just told you, I actually had so many reasons not to have children. And I am so thankful that I didn't. And I'm thankful that I didn't also because that means I can help my nieces and nephews even more in ways that I couldn't if I had my own children. And it's possible to build a loving and supported life without having to rely on your children for that. So yeah, find out what makes you tick. Go after it and have the courage to just really live boldly. It was so funny because I had an employee and she hasn't had kids. I don't know if she's ever going to, or just no kids. And I would obviously never ask her. But it's so funny because she always complained about the coworkers who start work late or leave early to pick up their kids. And she's like, those of us who don't have kids, we don't get that. We don't get that. And I'm just sitting there going, I don't even care. I'm just so thankful that I don't have to do that. That is so much stress and pressure, and I'm just so glad that I've made the choices in my life that whatever I'm doing, I can just do that thing and do my best at it, enjoy it, and not feel guilty that I'm not with my kids, or not feel guilty that I'm picking up those hypothetical children and have to miss a meeting or take the call from the car. Yeah, I'm just so glad that I don't have to do that. I didn't want that life and I chose not to have it. And for my coworker friends who have to do those things, I'm so sorry. And I'm so happy when I see their kids get older and be more self-sufficient. And I have so many friends who did choose to have kids, whether they're the ones who came to me later and said they wish they hadn't or not. And they're sitting there and their kids are about to go off to college or have just started college. And they're sitting there going, now what? Now what? Because now is the part where they get to build their life. And I'm happy for them that they get to do that now. And I'm happy for them that they're proud of their kids who've gone into college. And I'm happy that at night after I'm done working, I can play video games and not worry about having to feed anybody else, because feeding myself is really hard sometimes. But I'm so proud of millennial and Gen Z women who are actively having this thought and going through this thought process. And for millennials who are doing it for financial reasons, I think that's really hard and sad, because if they really want children, I wish that things were different right now, so that people who want to have kids and would be good parents have the resources to do it. But I'm also proud of them for recognizing that if they don't have the resources, it's not something they should do, because I see a lot of people who are living under very strained circumstances because they did have more kids than they have resources for, and it's made their lives really hard. So if that's you watching this, then my heart goes out to you, and I hope that you find a way to make that better for yourself and your kids. I'm Gabby from She Makes It Work. Please look for an upcoming episode where Abby has a very different conversation about what it's like to be a single working mother. And I hope that everything we're doing is helping our audience, because that's frankly all we care about, is helping other women navigate this very confusing and sometimes difficult world of being a woman in business or a woman in corporate America. So anyway, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Okay, bye.